Hey guys, this is Maynard from Professor Ron McNinch's LW442 Intercession Class, and I'll be doing this short video on Chapter 3, which talks about business and the Constitution, primarily the United States Constitution. Chapter 3 is in Part 1 of the book, which focuses on the foundations of American law. Business and the Constitution. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. This quote probably suggests that before the people make or establish their government, it is to be assumed that they will follow that government and its dealings. The learning objectives for this chapter are as follows: basics of the Constitution and federalism, relationship between federal and state powers, important legal principles, supremacy, preemption, and constitutional guarantees and limitations. Constitutions serve two general functions. First, they set up the structure of government, allocating power among its various branches and subdivisions. Second, they prevent government from taking certain actions, especially actions that restrict individual or corporate rights. The United States Constitution establishes a tripartite government, which consists of legislative, executive, and judicial branches, to ensure a separation of powers. Article 1, 2, and 3 provide a system of checks and balances in which no one branch may control another or have too much power. Article 1 sets forth the legislative powers of Senate and Congress. It also gives the President the power to veto legislation passed by Congress, but allows Congress to override such a veto by a 2/3 vote of each House. Article 2 gives executive power to execute legislation and command armed forces. It also requires that treaties made by the President be approved by a 2/3 vote of the Senate. Article 3 provides judicial power to the Supreme Court and the subsidiary courts, and also gives Congress some control over the Supreme Court's appellate jurisdiction. The power to regulate. The federal government has exclusive power to administer certain national concerns such as war and currency. The most important congressional powers contained in Article 1, Section 8, however, are the powers to regulate commerce among the states, to lay and collect taxes, and to spend for the general welfare. Some powers are shared with the states. Shared powers include power to tax and power to spend. States possess an exclusive power to enact laws to protect general welfare, health, and safety. Both state and federal powers are limited due to independent checks placed by the U.S. Constitution. Supremacy and preemption. Due to the principle of federal supremacy, the Constitution and statutes enacted by Congress, including treaties, are the supreme law of the land. This is stated in the Supremacy Clause, which is Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution. The preemption doctrine found in Article 1, Section 8 lists issues on which Congress may pass statutes. Thus, if Congress enacts a law on a certain issue, then Congress preempts state regulation of that issue. For example, Congress enacted the Civil Rights Act of 1964, so a state cannot enact a law allowing discrimination based on race, religion, or gender. Courts apply a means-ends test to review allegedly unconstitutional statute. In other words, the means-ends tests determine how courts strike the balance between individual rights and the social needs that may justify their suppression. There are three general types of means-ends tests. The rational basis test, also known as minimal scrutiny, is a very relaxed test which most challenge laws pass with ease. Basically, if the law has rational basis, it will stand. Intermediate scrutiny tests if challenged laws are substantially related to important governmental objectives in order to stand. Strict scrutiny presumes laws as invalid if it is based on race, ethnicity, or religion. Most government actions that are subject to this type of means-ends test are usually struck down. The Commerce Power. The Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, allows Congress to regulate interstate commerce. It originally served as an independent check on state regulation that unduly restricts interstate commerce. The present concern is the Commerce Clause's role as a source of congressional regulatory power. The Supreme Court has applied the power to interstate commerce when the activity affects interstate commerce. The First Amendment. The First Amendment guarantees freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition to individuals and corporations. Although it guarantees these freedoms, the First Amendment is not absolute and does not prohibit every law that restricts speech. An example would be shouting fire in a crowded movie theater while the movie is playing. Do not try it. It's illegal. Commercial speech is a category of expression that proposes a commercial transaction. Most cases involving this category deal with advertisements for the sale of products or services or for the promotion of a business. Restriction on commercial speech is valid if it 1. Seeks to implement a substantial government interest, 2. Directly advances interests, and 3. Is the least restrictive method of achieving interests. For an example of a case, see Kasky versus Nike. Constitutional limitations. The Fifth Amendment prohibits federal government from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It protects people from unreasonable procedures or unreasonable laws, and it is applied to states through the 14th Amendment. Furthermore, due process has both procedural and substantive meanings. Procedural due process entitles an individual to adequate notice of the government action to be taken against him and to some sort of fair trial or hearing before that action can occur. Procedural due process does not challenge rules of substantive law. Substantive laws are rules that set standards of behavior for organized social life. Thus, substantive due process occurred early in the 20th century when courts struck down various kinds of social legislation as denying due process. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment prohibits a government from treating one person differently than another without reasonable grounds for differential. The rational basis test described earlier also applies to social and economic regulations that are challenged as denying equal protection. Suspect classifications require higher level scrutiny. The following classes are subject to different types of scrutiny. Race and national origin are subject to the most rigorous kind of strict scrutiny. Alienage is subject to strict scrutiny, but not as rigorous as race or national origin. Sex and illegitimacy are subject to intermediate scrutiny. The phrase depriving a person of property is known as the Takings Clause. It was traditionally applied when the government formally condemns land through its power of eminent domain. The Takings Clause requires government to pay compensation to the property owner for taking property for public purpose through eminent domain. Alright guys, it's time to test our knowledge with a few true and false and multiple choice questions. Let's try our best to answer them correctly. Well, I already have the answers, but yeah, anyways, let's move on to the first question. The Constitution establishes a tripartite government. True or false? The answer is true. The tripartite government consists of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The federal government has exclusive power over matters of war and taxation. True or false? The answer is false. Both federal and state levels of government have the power to tax. States possess exclusive power to enact laws to protect welfare, health, and safety. True or false? The answer to that is true. The Fifth Amendment prohibits depriving any person of life, liberty, or happiness. True or false? The answer to that is false. There is no constitutional guarantee of happiness. And second, the prohibition is against the government from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process. Federal supremacy means that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. True or false? The answer to that is true. The federal government may not interfere with interstate commerce. True or false? The answer to that is false, since the Commerce Clause provides that the federal government has the power to regulate interstate commerce. The federal government may not restrict individual or commercial speech. True or false? The answer to that is false, since a restriction on commercial speech is valid if it 1. Seeks to implement a substantial government interest, 2. Directly advances the interest, and 3. Is the least restrictive method of achieving the interest. Constitutional limitations on governmental power includes the Fifth Amendment. True or false? The answer to that is true. The Takings Clause means that the federal government cannot take away an individual's freedom. True or false? The answer to that is false. The Takings Clause refers to the prohibition against the government taking an individual's property without due process. Multiple choice. Courts apply a means-ends test to review an allegedly unconstitutional statute. Which level of scrutiny applies to a statute that gives benefits to people based on their religion? A. Minimal scrutiny, B. Intermediate scrutiny, or C. Strict scrutiny. The answer to that is C. Strict scrutiny. Substantive due process refers to a prohibition against A. Unreasonable procedures, B. Unreasonable laws, C. Unreasonable or unfair results, D. Both A and B, or E. All of the above. The answer to that is D. Both unreasonable procedures and unreasonable laws. I hope that was an informative video for you, and on that note, I would like to end with a thought question. What constitutional issues are important to you? Hope you guys had a happy new year, and cheers.